Namaste, Shelly. I'm greeting you with the Sanskrit that means the divine in me, the light in me, recognizes and salutes the light in you. And what is your greeting?
Namaste. My greeting would be white, which means white is an acknowledgement to everything up to this moment. If we had one word that is the most important word in our language, I think white would be it.
Wow. Acknowledging everything up until this moment. Great. Perfect.
So you hear that white limlumt, thank you, white hello, white chashal, white,
Okay.
white ihi put, this is done.
Nice. Thank you. So we're here at Yasodhara Ashram, and I'm really happy to welcome Shelly Boyd.
Comprend. White in chai squeeze praset, ko so Shelly Boyd. Kinsenait stakmilu tulachai hula talkin limtkanala. And I just said, my name is Praset, but I'm also called Shelly Boyd, and that I am an Arrow Lakes woman, and that our people come from the land here.
Beautiful. Yeah. So welcome to your land. Yeah. It's really wonderful to have you here. Could you say what your position is in your nation?
So it's interesting. They call me an Arrow Lakes facilitator or cultural facilitator or coordinator. Yeah, have you ever heard that term gopher? Like go for this, go for that. I think I'm that on a kind of a different level.
Cultural level.
Right. And I report to a person who his title is a Territorial land advisor, because the Colville tribes are a confederation of 12 different bands. And so, not to go too long into any of that, but basically the colonization mechanisms for Canada and the United States were a little bit different. And one of the mechanisms that they used in the United States was they gave a larger piece of land, but they had a lot of different tribes together on that land. And they would often put tribes that didn't get along on that same base. And in Canada, it seems that what they did was they spread the people out and they gave them little tiny pieces of land that there's no way they could live on.
Well, neither sounds great.
No, they were both, just mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. So could you talk about the recent victory for your people?
Sure.
What just happened for you?
So if we go back a little bit, in 1956, we were declared extinct in Canada. And we are the only First Nations people of Canada that have a declaration of extinction. Why would only one First Nations people of all of Canada have a declaration of extinction? Why not just disappear, which many First Nations and Indigenous people on both sides of the border, whole people disappeared. But to have a declaration is unique. 1956 was also the year that they completed the survey mapping for the Columbia River Treaty, which is a treaty between the United States and Canada that at this point the dams in Canada, along with the Canadian share of the Grand Coulee Dam, account for half of the hydroelectricity in BC. And what they call upriver benefits or entitlement money, depending on which side of the line you're talking about. The United States pays Canada now about $300 million plus that power. So if we look at motives, that might be one. But there's no memo that says, let's write a declaration. And it's not to say that was the only reason. There were many things that led up to that as far as the diminishment of our people. My Tupia, my great-grandmother, who was alive during the time when our reservation was established, said that our people came down to fish because the the bottom of our territory is a place called Kettle Falls, which is a main fishery on the Columbia River. And when our people came down, she said they closed the border and said, if you're south, you're American. If you're north, you're Canadian. If you're on the east side of the river, you are a Colville. I mean, you're a Spokane. And if you're on the west side of the river, you're a Colville. In Canada, one of the colonial benefits for Indigenous people is that you can hunt and fish in your traditional territory. You can gather in your traditional territory. So Rick Disatel, one of our tribal members, and Sinixt man, came up and harvested an elk, and he called himself into the RCMPs. And it took a while, but he was charged. And then as we didn't know what was going on, but it took a while for them to actually call him to court. And we suspect it was because of the treaty negotiations that BC is now undergoing with different tribes. And again, I reflect on what was said. I mean, how things were happening with the extinction. I think they just had to kind of check off a box, and they had to make sure, like, we get this taken care of. It was very much a kind of David and Goliath situation. No one expected our tribe to win. Our attorney was specifically told by other attorneys and other people who had worked on these cases, don't go to, you're not going to win. And I think that the Crown just didn't pay enough attention to what they were doing. And so instead of charging us with being south of the border, they said that we had enthusiastically moved south to become farmers. But none of us farm. And I remember there was a moment in the courtroom where the judge said, so you have a group of people who have hunted and fished and are known for that since time immemorial, and they decided to become farmers for 20 years and then abandon that and go back to hunting and fishing. And they said yes. But anyway, it went through the court system and ended at the Supreme Court, and we won that. We got the decision earlier this spring. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I now exist in 2 countries for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know a way to tell a short answer. I just don't have short answers.
That's
so
okay.
If there's ever...
It's important to say it, and it was a much longer story than that. It's happened over years and years. I know that at every level you kept winning and kept being challenged by the BC government until you finally won at the Supreme Court, and that is new. So you're at a stage now of having territorial hunting rights in Canada, in your territory. And what does that feel like, or how are your people responding to that?
Well, it's not about having hunting rights. For our people, it's about being acknowledged that we exist. And so not too much has really changed. What has changed has been more on a spiritual level and an emotional level than on a physical level. But you can't, I think that the ashram is a place filled with people that understand that the things that are spiritual and emotional are more important than things that are physical in nature. So it's not necessarily about, being able to hunt or fish or pick huckleberries or dig roots or any of that, as it is to be able to look out and, see this body of water, and even the way that we were, you introduced me as a person from this land. In our chaptik, in our creation stories, women grew from the land. Like, we literally grew up from the land. And it's important as an Indigenous person, I think, everywhere, like, that connection is so important. And what I felt like personally going through that system, the court system, it didn't feel like you win. It felt like you're guilty or not guilty. And so it kind of felt like we were guilty of existing, and now we're not guilty of existing. And that part means everything. And it means something that I don't think you and I can understand yet for other people. It's the ones that are coming behind us that are going to understand that better. And I think our job is to, or my job is to help people navigate that on an emotional level or a spiritual level, or what does that really mean? And then we get back to those deeper issues of what does the land really mean? What does, what does the damming of a river really mean? What does the damming of many rivers really mean? What is, not to say there's not benefits, but what are the consequences? And regardless of what we do in our life, we have to make hard choices. But to understand what are consequences? There's good consequences and there's negative consequences, and we have to choose, but to be aware of what we're choosing is a good thing. And I think that that's part of it, like our existence is part of it. What it means to me is just an opening for truth. And I think that that's the only thing that we can all really follow, whether it's on a spiritual level, a physical level, within ourselves. Truth is a hard thing to follow. Sometimes it tells you to do things or say things or stand up in things that you don't feel prepared to do. But when you can do it when you know it's the truth, you do it. Or you can do it easier. My late husband, he would say that no matter how hard a path is, following the truth is going to be the easiest way through it.
Yeah. You have to be courageous to do that, to keep standing for it against that opposition that you don't exist.
I think so. And I look at Rick Dizitel in particular. Rick Dizitel is somebody who has no legal issues with the law historically. He's just a conscious person trying to do good things. But part of who he is and what enriches him is to come into his traditional territory and hunt. And that's, even though it's against the law, no one really pays attention to it. And since, time moved, I get asked all the time, like, why aren't your people home? Why haven't they done this? And well, there's all kinds of reasons, of course, like practical things, like we can't live here, we can't work here, we can't access health care here, we can't have any of those things. But my point is that Rick has come up, and this has been part of his, his soul and his life and all of those things. And had they gone against him on this, he would have been, at worst, barred from coming into Canada, and for sure barred from hunting. And for our people, hunting and fishing is a very important part of it, and gathering. Those are still not just sustainable acts. Like everybody I know in my community has deer meat in their freezer and has huckleberries in their freezer and has, those kinds of things in their, or canned or whatever. But it is also an act of reciprocity. And there's something to like eating our Indian foods or our indigenous foods.
And all of your stories, your creation stories, are the animals offering themselves, and so that reciprocity that you talk about, like it's not, I don't know, it's like leveling something out where, like in the white culture, there's always this hierarchy that the humans are the greatest, but in your stories, it's like the animals are also the wise teachers.
Yeah, I would say our stories, it's the opposite, right? Like they are the ancestors, right? So the look is, and when we look at this, it's like this, and it makes more sense. I mean, it makes more sense to me. But I think it makes more sense to anyone who happens to be, in the woods, and we can use all kinds of things, but a grizzly is a really easy one, right? Like you go in the woods and you're alone with a grizzly. You don't think you're superior to that beast. You don't think, it doesn't even cross your mind that you're the one that has any edge there. But
So true.
right, all of those things. But you think about, what survives and how adaptable, animals are, and that's one thing. Our extinction. I look at and think about. My mom says that we're not here because our ancestors suffered. We're here because our ancestors were strong. One of another spiritual practice that we have, I think, is the most important, is that there's no wrong way to pray. That every prayer, doesn't matter, what religion you are, what spirituality you are, you're praying for help, you're praying for good things, you're praying for, there's just not a certain way you can pray there's not a word or an order in which you can say that to be wrong. You can't put a good intention out into the world in an incorrect manner.
Yeah.
And so it makes me curious about that, because I think that many religions, are more closed to that. But I think that all religions share a certain truth. And if we look from spiritual perspectives about what are the truths that we all share, and then maybe we can get more to what, the creators or God or, whatever the word is that we say, Kulin Chutin, that's one anyway. What is that? What does that mean? And kind of disregard the things that don't make sense. We don't have to figure that out. We can go on the things that maybe make sense, or that are common, and try to pull the pieces that make sense. Not that at the end of the day, I think all we have to do is live a good way. We don't have to figure everything out, but sometimes it's helpful to figure things out.
Yeah. I like the no prayer is wrong. And I think that's what Swami Radha was trying to do with the temple, is say, like, every tradition is welcome here. It's not that everyone has a wrong answer and there's only one right way. Mm-hmm. It's like everyone has a way, and it's right for them. Mm-hmm. But we can meet in understanding. Like if we go to the center, if we go to that place of where there is a meeting place. Yeah, I don't know why this is my path, but it is. Mm-hmm. And you know why yours is your path, because you were born into it and it works for you. Mm-hmm. And I can learn from you because you have knowledge that I don't have.
And I can learn from you because you have knowledge I don't have.
Yeah.
And when we share things that make sense, because I think that that's the struggle, right? Is that we go through life and we can't understand things that are painful. We can't understand our way out of them. Yeah. And so if we have more kind of guides, or, I loved in the temple the lights, the different lights, and looking at that, maybe the light that someone needs for something is this one over here, but someone else needs this one over here. But if we can find as many options to see the light, in the way that we can all understand it, it makes sense. And as we get, I've heard it termed beautiful years, as we get to the beautiful years. But in our beautiful years, I think we have a obligation. We've lived through some darker times, and we know that there's light at even the most darkest time. We just don't see it.
Yeah.
And I really believe that our job as we get to those beautiful years is to just, we can't make anyone see light, but sometimes we can, like, at least point in a direction and just reassure them that there is light.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's that hope that you talked about earlier too. To keep that flame alive, right? Because people, there's so much happening in the world that is dark and despairing, and relentless in a way.
I think that's a good word, especially now with COVID, right?
Yeah.
We could definitely call COVID relentless,
Yeah.
but hasn't it shown the fortitude that we have to like
Yeah.
just be in this moment?
Yeah,
And it
for
might
sure.
be a dark moment, but there's things in the dark that maybe we need to see.
Yeah.
Definitely, I
Yeah.
think that we need to look at. So I think that there was an extra darkness that was put on the people of the territory up here that is being lifted up for everyone. And I think that part of the reason that I'm here getting all the way back to my mom is because we're strong. But I think that I'm so blessed to have a spiritual connection to the land. And I think as Indigenous people globally, and I'm not trying to talk about or for Indigenous people globally, but everyone's voice is important, and that voice of the land is so important in a spiritual framework.
And it's particularly important at this time.
I think exactly.
Yeah, particularly important. Yeah, I'm so pleased that that your people are rising up. That's what I see. The Indigenous people are rising up. You know, that your knowledge is being recognized.
Thank you. I do feel like we're getting to a moment in time where at least we're seeing the choices.
Yeah.
And I think that we're no longer afraid to voice. You know, our winter dances are known for covering all the windows and doors because it was against the law. You know,
Wow.
until 1974, it was against the law to practice our spiritual beliefs. And it got, you know, of course, when the law was enacted to when it was removed, I mean, when it was taken away, or I don't even know what they call it, but it was stricken from the books. People were still practicing, but that the practice of covering our windows and our doors was practical too. I mean, we talk about this, you know, containing spirit and doing things like that, but it was also to make sure that farm agents and Indian agents and legal entities weren't going to come and you know, we wouldn't be persecuted for that. And those are real. You know, if we look at the Second Wounded Knee, those people were all massacred for ghost dancing. And so why wouldn't, you know, our ancestors were, I think, in real fear for jump dancing. And so those were things that you had to be aware of. And so when you have things like the Supreme Court lifting, it is a level of safety to go ahead and speak. And even though you might feel like it's ridiculous, of course we've been speaking for a long time, but I think that law also has a spiritual connotation to it, that everything does. And so when you have something turned like the Supreme Court, it's not just a legal turn, it is a spiritual turn, it's an emotional turn, it's a physical turn, it's all of those things. We might not be able to identify how that does, but it does speak in a different way.
What do you hope for your people and for the future?
My hope is really like, I can't, it's still being developed, but I know salmon passage, land protection, I think that we are the voice of the land, and to elevate that voice is really important. And so land territorial acknowledgements, for instance, are based on 1811 to 1847. And so that's what we had to go through legally to kind of go through. And that was first contact. So first contact, all of this was Sinixt territory, and it was documented really well. And my ancestors say, you know, it's time immemorial that we came from this earth. And I'm not getting into a piece of like territory. What I'm really getting at is that we came from this earth, that in our creation stories, a woman grew from this earth. And when I look out here, I can see, you know, her growing from the earth. And with that is the responsibility of the voice of the land. But I guess my dream personally, as someone who's approaching her beautiful years, is that we elevate the voice of the land and have use the best technology, the best ecology, the best wisdom on the side of the land, and that we make some sacrifices, or at least some choices. We don't even have to call them sacrifices, because as we all know, when we choose not to do something that benefits us in a level of comfort, we get something else that is beautiful. So it's not a sacrifice, it's a choice. And that we learn to make better choices that we can live with, but the land can live with better. And of course, healing is a huge part, because those are the things like truth, I think, is how we get to healing. And for our people, I'm really privileged. Amongst my people, I'm a very privileged person. And I also recognize I've had a very difficult life. But there is hope in truth. And I want my people to understand how beautiful and important they are. I told you about the most recent suicide at home. And I just don't want anyone else to feel like that they don't have a choice. I don't want anyone else to feel like that this world is better off without them, or that they can't come to a place where they understand that they have light inside of them. And that part of that healing journey, it's not in a Supreme Court decision, it's not in a territorial land acknowledgement, but it is grounded in the truth that we come from the land, and that this land is beautiful, and they're beautiful, that we're all beautiful. And see, I ask for small things.
I love that. Thank you. That's beautiful. Well said. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye.
Bye.